great pleasure that today I'm going to be talking to a remarkable woman called Rosalind Cardinal. Now, I feel like I'm going back in time a little bit because Ros and I, we never, I don't think, ever officially met, but I was aware of you because one of the things I used to do, I used to work for Aurora Energy over a decade ago now, and I worked
in a while.
Yeah, I worked in the retail section, and corporate were upstairs in this particular building, and every now and then there were a couple of women who I was aware of who would come in dressed amazingly and just looked like very strong and very confident women, of which one was you. And so I knew of you, and you used to take the elevator up to the other floor. So when somebody recommended you to talk to me, like, oh, I know Ros. I really would like to talk to Ros. And obviously also I follow Ros through social media because Ros is the principal consultant for Shape and Change, and which is your own consultancy that you established once you left, I assume, Aurora.
Yes.
Back a number of years ago. And I'll just read it because I want to make sure I get it right so people understand. Is that you specialise in improving business outcomes by developing individuals, teams and organisations. And if you go onto the Shape and Change website, there is an incredible list of qualifications, certificates, and it's amazing. And there's a lot of things in there. The average person goes, I don't know what that means.
HR is full of acronyms.
Yeah, there's lots of acronyms. There's like MBTI, I do understand, but the rest. So clearly, but what that tells me is clearly very passionate and very committed to your craft. And if you also Google Ros, you'll realise that not only is she very passionate about her craft, she's also very good at it, because there's a lot of accolades and awards that you've recently received. I've just mentioned a couple for people, but you were given the Leadership Coach of the Year for Australia this year by the Corporate Livewire Innovation and Excellence Awards.
Yes.
Shaping Change Your Business has been a finalist in the Australian Small Business Champion Awards for the last 2 years. And you've just released your own book. I think it's about, I didn't write it down.
It's called The Resilient Employee.
That's it. Yeah. I can see the picture in my mind's eye. And your story's also been in another book, The Australian Entrepreneur, in 2014. So you're clearly amazing. I think we can stop the interview now.
Thank you. That was easy.
That was easy, but
we can all go home.
We can all go home now. So I'm really interested to talk to you. I know there's some people who have had the opportunity to hear your story before, and so really, really feel quite privileged for you to be able to share it today. But perhaps if I invite you now to maybe just give a little bit of, I guess, that background as to your journey from going from that corporate environment and into your own very successful consultancy firm.
Sure. Look, it's kind of one of those stories, I guess, that a lot of people have but often don't talk about. And for me, it was about, I guess, a life-changing event in my life that really sort of triggered everything for me. So I'd been in the corporate world since 1987. I started in the Australian Commonwealth Public Service in Canberra many, many years ago. And I was working for Aurora Energy, and that would have been, I remember you too, you know, the sort of thing, you see people in the lift and you know who they are, but you don't necessarily get a chance to meet them. And yes, I was working for Aurora, and I'd been the organisational development manager for quite some time at that point. And in 2010, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which was kind of a horrifying coincidence. It was actually the anniversary of my mum's death from breast cancer in 2005, so exactly 5 years later. So it was a bit, to say it's a bit of a shock was an understatement, really. It was horrifying. I just remember sitting there, and the doctor said, I'm sorry, you have cancer, and just everything just goes blank. You can't think of anything. It's just, you know, it's almost like the world kind of just shrinks down to this little bubble, just me and the doctor sort of thing sitting there. And of course they can't tell you anything about it until they operate and find out what it is. So I had a few days. I mean, they got me into hospital pretty quickly. It was in a couple of days. And all I could think about at that stage was this is it for me. It was awful. And that sort of sense of all the things that I wished I'd gotten around to doing in my life. It was that sense of all these things that I'd had on my bucket list, I guess, that I should be doing, would like to do. And I was just left with this overwhelming sense of loss that I was never going to get to do all the things that I wanted to do. So as it turned out, things worked out quite well and I'm still here. But going through the process, I guess one of the things I said to my husband while I was going through the recovery process and treatment was I said to him, when I get better, we're going to start travelling.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking about going overseas and we just never gotten around to it. Kids were too young, there were too many responsibilities, couldn't get enough annual leave, all of the reasons that you have for not doing things. And so we started travelling. In 2011 was actually our first overseas trip. As soon as I got the all clear to fly, pretty much, it was straight on a plane and off to America. And out of that, I did a lot of soul searching over the next, it probably took me about a year to really think through everything properly and think about what did I really want to do, what was my life going to look like. And one of those things was really delving into this passion that I have for helping people be the best they can possibly be. And I certainly had a lot of opportunity to do that while I worked at Aurora. We did some amazing things. Very, very proud of some of the work that we did. But for me, it was starting to think about how do I expand that and take it to more people. Yeah. And so, 2012, I'd thought a lot about it and got to the point where I was ready to make the leap, I guess, and start a business. I had originally thought about going out as an associate of another company, but, the stars weren't aligned in that respect. Yep. They certainly wanted me to join them and they ended up making me an offer quite some time later, but by that stage I was established, so it didn't come off. But so there I was in 2012 and made the decision to head out on my own and actually start doing what I was doing, but in the broader environment with more people. So it was a wonderful decision. Best thing I ever did when I think back on it. Yeah. I'm really, really glad. But it was certainly one of those things that I don't know whether I would have done it if I hadn't had cancer. And somebody asked me recently, they said, it was in the context of what do you regret about it? And I said, look, I actually don't regret having had cancer, because if I hadn't had that experience, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
You'd still be at Aurora?
Probably, maybe still. Well, I don't know. They merged with and became Tas Network, so who knows what would have happened? But I probably would still be in a corporate job somewhere, and probably enjoying it, but not really fulfilling my own full potential, and certainly not helping as many people fulfil theirs.
Just interested in your views around when you first entered the workforce. I think then to where you are now, whether you're pleased with the amount of progress that's been made, and perhaps maybe if any of your own reflections on your own personal journey or those of others you've seen along the way.
Look, I think we certainly haven't come as far as I would like to think we could have. If I go back to starting in the workplace, I think I started my first, real job in about 1986. And I do remember back then working with women who were in the public service the second time round, because the first time round they'd been forced to resign when they got married. So those were people who were, a generation removed from me, but it wasn't that far, that long ago at the time. And I remember back then there was almost an expectation that all the women who fell pregnant were going to leave. And certainly most of them did. There was very few women that I worked with anyway that returned to work certainly after the second baby. A number of them did. I remember I was actually in personnel as personnel officer at the tax office, and I introduced flexible working hours for a lady who worked for me who had 5 children, and she wanted to work part-time, and it was one of the things that was almost quite unheard of in those days, so I arranged for her to be able to do that. And it was quite interesting, because it was just the way that things were done. I don't think anyone really thought too much of it at the time. It was just, you had babies and you left work, and you might come back later on once your children were in school, but it was pretty much expected that you had that career gap, I guess. And so because of that, one of the things that was really obvious was that there was so few women in senior leadership roles. When they came back, they generally almost had this sense of having to catch up because they'd missed so much work. If they had 5 years off, they had to catch that back up. But then that sense that they weren't as committed. There was always going to be a reason why they weren't going to be as committed as men, because they had those family responsibilities. And I certainly remember conversations in the workplace about promotions and things like that, where people were sort of saying, it's probably just as well she didn't get the job, because it would have meant a lot of travel and she'd have family issues around that. And I never heard that said about a man. Having said that, I think we've come a long way, and at least now we're having the conversation. And I'm very, very pleased with that. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of changing the paradigm around women in the workplace. And look, it it is what it is. And I mean, one of the challenges is that, you know, when people work together, it's that sense of people choose other people to work with who are like them. And when you've got very senior people in organisations who are sort of like that white male, you know, those are the kinds of people that they attract and the kinds of people they work with. And it's overcoming that unconscious bias around working with people who are different to us. And it doesn't just apply to women, it applies to, you know, people from other cultural backgrounds. It's that sense of how do we get more used to working with people who are different. And I remember a really funny conversation that I had, it was quite a few years ago now. It was with a women's leadership group that I was involved in, and we had a couple of senior men come in to talk to us about women in leadership and what they thought. And somebody asked a very valid question, you know, could you give any advice for women about how to get to most senior ranks in organisations? And one of the men said, and he was completely serious, he said, you need to get a wife. And he said, that's how I did it. He said, my wife did everything for me. She ran the house, she looked after the kids, she did all of the domestic arrangements, which left me completely free to look after my own career. And I think that for me really triggered this thought around it's got to be different for men as well. We've got to do things differently for men and for women, not just for women.
Yeah, I was about to say that because that sets up a scenario that if you want to be able to have a full and productive working life, that you need to sacrifice
exactly
a certain part of your...
Not be involved in your family.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
he said,
right.
You know, she used to do everything for the kids, all the after school stuff, all of the school plays and things. He never went to any of it. And for me, that's really sad. It's that we need to really think about doing work differently, and not just, like I said, for the sake of women, but for the sake of men as well, because that's just, it's not fair when you think about it, that somebody would have to sacrifice so much of their, their time with children. And I mean, I've heard stories recently about very senior people in organisations who've quit work because they've had one of those circumstances where their, you know, child's come in and kind of said, you know, Daddy, how come you never spend any time with me? How come I never see you?
Yeah.
And it's been for them life-changing. They've gone, I actually need to do this differently, and they've quit work to go and do something else.
I've been asking people about how when they think about leadership and how they, you know, when they think about good leadership or bad leadership. Now, this is a topic you are just going to just know so much about. So I disclaimer this because most people I talk to aren't coaching or winning leadership awards. But so I guess it will be interesting then to hear your perspective on either what you think makes a good leader, or perhaps, you know, what are the characteristics that make a bad leader in some instances.
Look, it's a wonderful topic.
Yes.
wonderful topic.
It is.
And look, one of the things that I found is that, you know, I ask people this question a lot. I say, you know, think about a great leader you've worked for and what are the characteristics that define that leader, and then think of a leader who wasn't so great and what were the characteristics of that leader. Yes. And if you kind of distill all of the information that you get from those questions, the key thing that really stands out for me is that really effective leaders, what they do is they help people feel safe around them. It's that sense of they're making good decisions, they're taking us in the right direction, they listen to me, they empower me, I trust them. It's that real sense of people want to work with them, want to be around them, because it makes them feel psychologically safe. It's that sort of sense of, and when people feel safe, they're then free to be the best they can possibly be, because they're not worrying about having to protect themselves, or, you know, that sort of sense of competition between peers of, you know, standing out so the boss notices us. So I think that's really the guts of it, is that sort of sense of really good leaders help people, they help people feel safe, and then that frees the person to just go on and fulfill their potential. And conversely, the not so good leaders are the ones that you know, cause issues for people. It's that sort of sense of either the leader is quite unpredictable or quite scary or, you know, incompetent. There's all the things that people say, but what it drills down to again is that sense that we don't trust them, we don't feel safe around them. If they're not great on the technical side of it, we don't think they're making good decisions and they're not taking the business where it should go. Or if they're not great on the people side, it's that sense of we don't trust them, we don't feel safe, we don't feel like we're not listened to, we can't open up to them. Yeah. And so it's that sort of balance, I think, of, you know, sometimes leaders can be bad at both, but generally they're either bad at the people or bad at the task side of it. Whereas those leaders who are very highly competent and highly skilled and what I call great leaders are the ones who are really good at both. They're great at that, you know, task and direction and goals and vision and all those things that make people want to follow them. And they have that amazing capacity to make people feel safe and comfortable around them, so people want to follow them.
You would have interviewed a lot of people in your time and gone through a lot of those processes. I was interested in your view about whether you think merit has been a successful approach. And I know it's a hard question.
And it gets back to what I was talking about earlier about that unconscious bias, because what happens is that when we, in an interview situation, for example, where we make up our minds about people within the first few seconds of meeting them. That's a fact. That's how our brains work. We classify everything in a binary way. It's like me, not like me, for me, against me, good, bad, that sort of thing. And I remember somebody telling me a story once, and I was just fascinated by it. She was on an interview panel, and she said that she was waiting for the next person to arrive for the interview, and she looked out of the window. They were overlooking the car park, and she saw this really daggy VW with flowers hand painted all over the sides of it draw up into the car park, and this lady got out. And she remembered thinking to herself, I hope she's not our next candidate, because I could never work for somebody who drives a car like that.
Right.
Sorry, never work with someone who drives a car like that. And it turned out that was the candidate. And she said even though the lady interviewed quite well, she still had in the back of her mind that story about the the beat up VW. And she told me this story when I was actually doing it was a speaking gig I did around unconscious bias, and this lady actually told me the story about it. And she said, I'm quite ashamed of it, but I just couldn't get past the fact that I'd made up my mind about this. And that's what happens. We make up our mind. So when you go to meet your candidate to bring them in, you've made up your mind just in that first few seconds of meeting them. You shake hands, you say hello. You've already decided if you want to work with them or not, based on a whole range of emotional things. And once you've made up your mind about it, it's very, very hard to break that down. And so what happens is that, if we get a choice of two candidates who are both equally qualified and both good, and you look at them both and you go, both of them would be a good fit for the job, you choose the person that you like. And the reason that you like them is because they're like you. And that's not necessarily a good thing. It makes a great dinner party, but it doesn't make a good team, because diversity is useful. So if we choose people who are like us, we end up with people who are very similar tastes, very similar backgrounds. And I've heard it's called the halo effect when you think about interviewing, is people will often latch onto a particular detail and overlook a lot of things. So yes, that person didn't answer the interview question that well, but they went to the same university as me, so that makes them okay. And that creeps in even when people don't intend it to. So I think the merit-based approach is a good approach, but people don't know how to use it effectively because we haven't trained them to lose this unconscious bias.
Yeah.
So even though we think we're recruiting on merit and we believe in it, if you ask people, they will swear hand on heart that it was entirely merit-based, but it just wasn't. We know that because that's how human beings operate.
Another thing that has a little bit of tension, I think, in practice and theory, I'm not sure you'll be able to tell me in a minute, I guess, is that for women putting themselves up for leadership roles, there has been, I think, a theory of thought that women need to have more confidence, be more assertive and have more belief in their abilities. Sometimes women can be a bit timid and a little bit apologise a lot and be a little unsure. But then there is and again from my own personal experience, and you'll have people say, well, she was too aggressive, she was too arrogant, she was too, you need to tone it down a little bit. And so there's this thing about women potentially needing to act like a man in order to get the role, but then they're seen to be too pushy
and too tough.
And so I'm just interested in your experiences on that, and I guess on your experiences what your perspective is about what is the right balance for a female. And
look, that's certainly true, and it's very discouraging for women in the workplace. I think that sense that you have to be, if you act like a man, you're seen as far too aggressive, and if you act like a woman, you're seen as far too soft and too much of a pushover and too emotional for the workplace. And again, that's one of these unconscious bias things that we need to, as a society, work our way through. Women and men lead very differently. They lead from a very different space. And it goes back to, we don't have to go too far back into our past as human beings to see a world where different sorts of leadership from men and women made absolute sense. When you think about our ancestral setting in the plains of Africa, for example, and you've got men there who are leaders, and they're leaders because they're great hunters. They make quick decisions. They lead. They make good calls for the well-being of the tribe. But it comes from quite not necessarily an aggressive sense, but it's a sense of being very competent at what they do. And if you were the leader because you were the best hunter and you had a bit of an off day, it wasn't going to be too long before the second best hunter was kind of on your heels looking to take over. Whereas women in leadership, women stayed behind in the villages and they looked after the children, they looked after the old people and they looked after the very young people, and they nurtured and they cared for society, and they worked together. And women's leadership is not hierarchical, it's more about networking and connection. So it's that sense of we sit together and we work, we prepare food, we do all the things that women had to do back then, but it's also this multi-generational thinking around you caring for little children and you're caring for old people, whereas men tend to have that much more directional, present focused thinking and decision making, whereas women are more, when they make decisions, it's much more strategic. It's that sort of sense of thinking about the future and thinking about the generations and thinking about what we're leaving for our children. So it's a very different paradigm when you think about the way women lead and the way that men lead, and there's absolutely a desperate need in the world for both. And it's that sense of, can we come to a point where both styles of leadership are equally valued? And that women don't have to pretend to be a man to get a leadership role and then be punished for behaving like a man. And, so it's interesting, it's challenging. I'd like to think that we're starting to have the conversations that might change this, but for me, it comes back to this simple recognition. It's different sorts of leadership, different strengths, and they all should be valued. Men have that ability to just quickly sort of do that, because it had to be here and now. It had to be about, our next meal for the tribe. Whereas women, it's much more that sort of sense of connection and nurturing in their leadership style. And, I find it completely fascinating that we value one sort, not the other.
If you've got an industry that is lacking in female participation, that they create female-specific cadetship programs or to get the women in as a feeder.
We did actually have a project at one point it was about attracting more women into the electrical trades. And one of the challenges there was twofold. One was it was actually trying to find women to apply, because most of them were just not interested in the idea of having a trade. They wanted to, become a hairdresser or whatever it was. And the other part of it was overcoming this really strong bias that the men had in the workplace. I remember talking to some fairly senior people and hearing messages like, one of them, I was just gobsmacked. He said, "I can't have a woman out there in the field because she'll be breaking up all the blokes' marriages."
Oh.
And then we had all the things thrown up at us like, it means the guy's going to have to get rid of all the girly mags out of the trucks and they're not going to want to do that. And what are we going to do about women going to the toilet? And all the things that, there were just all sorts of things thrown up, all these reasons not to do it. And, look, they're all things that can be worked around or, dealt with. But that was sort of thrown. So, it's sort of twofold. One is, how do we get rid of the attitude that, prevents women from being welcome in those circumstances? And then how do you actually create the demand so that women want to do that? And particularly when they think about, particularly if you look at some of those male-dominated trades, it doesn't feel like a very welcoming environment for a woman. So you can understand that. So it's almost chicken and the egg. What comes first, getting more women in and proving that the system can work, or changing the system so women feel more welcome in it?
Yeah.
It's, I haven't got an answer. I wish I did.
Yeah. Looking back, do you have any regrets or anything in your life that you think you might have done differently? It's always, again, it's a topic I find interesting in people, and if so, has it shaped how you do things differently now? Any kind of moments in your life?
Oh, look, I'm sure we all have those little things we would have done differently, but I think in terms of my career journey, where I've got to now, there are certainly things I don't say I regret things, but certainly there are things I would have done differently earlier on, perhaps. I certainly know that I spent a good deal of my time as a leader in that space of trying to lead like a man, and feeling like I was, I didn't enjoy myself. It's a sense of, I used to do things and do things around leading people, and I used to not like myself for it. I remember some of the decisions I might have made when I was a very young leader, going back to when I was 19, 20, and I did some things where I was probably downright bossy, and, certainly could have done things in a lot, I could have been a lot more compassionate. And, so those are the sorts of things I regret. I regret that I didn't learn the things that I know now a lot earlier, and I know most people would say that, if only I'd known back then what I know now. But I think my own personal leadership style could have been adjusted a lot earlier. I had some really big, significant wake-up calls around my leadership at various points in my career. And I remember somebody saying to me once, she said, "I can't do my best work for you unless I know you care about me as a person." And I was thinking, but of course I care about you. Why would you think I didn't care? And it's because she didn't feel a genuine connection from me, because all of the interactions I had with her were about task. it's about what are we doing, where are we at, how's the project going. And I used to sort of say, and how are you? But she could tell that I almost vagued out when she started telling me, with that sort of sense of, I'd say, how was your weekend? And then glaze over while she told me.
Yeah.
And I learnt a lot about myself through that process. And certainly, so I guess in terms of things I regret, I wish I'd learnt a lot of what I know now earlier in my career.
How do you hope for people to remember you? And this is not from a career sense. This is just from family and children. And do you ever think about that sort of legacy that you might leave for people thinking about you? And
I'd really like to think that people would remember me as having encouraged them to be the best they could possibly be. And, not necessarily even had anything to do with that process, but just given them the encouragement to go out and be their best and find their passion and do something they love and just enjoy their lives. Yeah. That's really it for me. That applies to work and it applies to family and friends and everything. It's every part of my life is about that. If we're getting blocked, if we're hitting glass ceilings, it's like, just get out of that system. Go and do something else. And there's some women with incredible businesses in Tasmania, very, very successful businesses. There's a quote that I keep coming back to, and it's a quote from Gandhi, and it's, be the change you want to see in the world. And I come back to that all the time. It's that sort of sense for me of, we've got to literally be the change we want to see in the world. And that was the whole, when I think about starting my business, that was really what was behind it. It was this sense of I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be doing more than what I was doing. And that's why I've written my book recently. It's about how do I continue to be the change that I want to see in the world. Not just talk about it, but actually get out there and do it.